So it would seem to me that the pro-forced birth movement has no idea the incredible amount of effort it takes to keep a brain-dead body functioning. From the comments I've been getting and the DMs I've been getting, I think y'all think that the patient is just sleeping, and that's not the case. So as a doctor who takes care of brain-dead patients in the hospital, I'm going to talk to you about what's actually involved in that process to help dispel some of these misconceptions. And if you happen to be pro-choice and are watching this video, make sure you share it far and wide so it gets to the intended audience, okay? Let's get started. So once a patient is declared brain dead, which is an entirely separate process that I'm not going to get into, but after that process takes place, the medical team now has to take over all of the bodily functions that the patient can no longer take care of themselves because their brain doesn't function anymore. So one of those things is breathing. Now all these patients will already have a breathing tube down their throat and hooked up to a ventilator. However, we can't keep that breathing tube in permanently, right? After 2 weeks, we have to take it out because it can cause a lot of issues. So what we'll do is make a surgical airway. We'll make an incision in the throat right here and put in a tracheostomy tube and then hook that up to the ventilator. And then the ventilator does all the breathing for the patient and we can adjust it as needed. How many breaths they take, how deep those breaths are, how much oxygen they get, etc. We're also responsible for maintaining the homeostatic balance within the body because the brain can no longer do that. That means giving medications to make sure things like the temperature, blood pressure, and heart rate don't go too high or too low. We maintain it in a normal range. There's often a lot of hormonal imbalances that come in patients with brain death. For example, one of them is something known as central diabetes insipidus. So that's the patient can no longer absorb water from their kidneys, so they just put out liters and liters and liters of very dilute urine and they become very dehydrated and their sodium levels start to rise. So we have to artificially hydrate them and give them a hormone known as desmopressin to help reverse this. And obviously these patients can't eat, they can't swallow, they can't chew, so we have to put a PEG tube, which is a feeding tube, in their stomach and hook them up to tube feeds and then give them their nutrition that way. And these patients require tons and tons of round-the-clock nursing care just to take care of the things that you would take for granted, like brushing your teeth, cleaning yourself. Every time they have a bowel movement, they need to be cleaned. They need to have lubricating eye drops put in so that their eyes don't dry and they get corneal ulcers. So those are just some of the basic things we have to do every single day just to keep the body functioning, let alone the myriad of complications that can arise from being bedbound and brain dead in an intensive care unit. So what are those complications? Well, infection is a big one. And, depending on the medical devices the patient has, can inform their infectious risk. So, for example, if they have a central line for medications, they can get a central line infection and a bloodstream infection. If they have a Foley catheter for, bladder decompression, they can get a urinary tract infection. But a lot of these patients will get what's known as a ventilator-associated pneumonia, which, as the name suggests, is a pneumonia because the patient's on a ventilator. And they're going to keep getting those pneumonias. And every time they get a new pneumonia, there's a risk for breeding a multi-drug resistant bacterial infection, and we have to use stronger and stronger antibiotics every time. And the stronger the antibiotic, the more likely there will be side effects. And then we have to treat those side effects as well with more medications. And even with the best nursing care and the best occupational and physical therapy, the body is going to start to break down because all the artificial support we give is no substitute for just normal bodily processes. So the skin will start to break down and ulcerate and get infected. The limbs will start to atrophy, the muscles will atrophy, the limbs will start to contract, and this can go on for years if the patient's underlying health status was good before they became brain dead. Now, I know this is a long video, so I'm gonna wrap it up. But the thing is, sometimes patients' families want this for their loved one, and we will honor their wishes. We will do it. We have the capability, we have the technology, and this is why we went into medicine, to help people, to help families. But there are families who don't want this. They don't want to see their loved one suffer like this. So they withdraw care, and all that stuff that I just said, we just stop and allow the bodily processes to cease. But the important thing is, we honor the family's wishes. And that's what I don't think you're getting right here. The family in Georgia does not want this, but they're forced to do it because of the law that you championed. So I hope this video helped.
I want to show you a clip of Donald Trump that went somewhat under the radar this past week that really just exposes how incompetent Donald Trump is. This clip is from when he was speaking at the New York Economic Club the other day, and he was asked a pretty complex policy question, and as expected, it didn't go well. He has no idea what he's talking about. So I want to show you this clip, but before I do so, make sure to subscribe down below. It goes a really, really long way. It helps a lot. But let's take a look at that clip, shall we? So here's the clip, and just brace yourself for a bunch of nonsense, essentially. Let's have a listen.
Hi, John.
First, let me thank you for your presentation today. President Trump, in the last fiscal year, the fiscal deficit under the Biden administration was approximately $2 trillion. Under the policies you've announced, the deficit would come down from items such as increased revenues from tariffs, as well as eliminating the tax incentives for the Green New Deal. These gains would be mitigated by decreases in revenues from policies such as no tax on tips. Overall, what do you estimate will be the impact of the fiscal deficit from your policies?
So first and foremost, before we hear Donald Trump's response, pretty tough question, right? That's a pretty specific question on fiscal policy, on deficit spending, things like that. Things that like Kamala Harris or Joe Biden or Tim Walz could speak very eloquently about. But Donald Trump is not none of those people. He's not Barack Obama. So let's hear this bumbling fool's response to this decently difficult question.
Well, we just hit record highs at numbers that nobody ever thought possible. You're right, it's over $2 trillion. Nobody thought that was a number that was, I mean, you can go back 4 years. Nobody thought a number like that would be possible. It's crazy. It's like, it's just horrible, actually. But yeah, we're $2 trillion, and I view it as profit and loss to a certain extent. A lot of people say, oh, it's trade. You know, you have many people say trade deficits don't matter. I think they matter a lot. I think they matter a lot. We're going to have tremendous growth. What I'm talking about is all about growth. The tax is relatively minor compared to the growth. We're going to make our money back on growth. We're going to also, I mean, we're going to grow like nobody's ever grown before. I think if this all works out, you're going to have the auto industry come back to America. Right now, China is building 2 auto factories in Mexico, massive auto factories, and they think they're going to make their cars in Mexico and send them back into the United States with no tax. It's not going to happen. Under this administration, it's going to happen. And they wanted to do that during my administration. I said, if you do it, we're going to put a 200% tariff on every car, and you'll never be able to see it. There will never be one car coming across our border. And if I would have let them do it, we would have had these 2 factories. Well, now they're building massive factories, more than 2, and they're going to kill Detroit. And the head of the union, the United Auto Workers in Detroit, has done a terrible, terrible job, just a terrible job. But we're going to bring tremendous growth back. And remember, we're also taking in a certain percentage. I won't name the percentage today, but it'll be a certain tariff percentage, which will be higher than people had heard in the past. And we will be bringing in billions and billions of dollars, which will directly reduce our deficits. Okay? Thank you very much. Good job you've done, by the way. Very good.
Donald Trump did not respond to the question even a little bit. He didn't respond to the question at all. He managed to actually make his situation worse. He attacked a union head in the swing state of Michigan in the middle of this speech talking about cars while he was rambling about nothing. He never had a chance. Donald Trump never had a chance with this difficult question, and he just proved how incompetent he is. Like, can anybody summarize what Donald Trump just said right there? I don't think that anybody could do that because he didn't say anything. He didn't answer the question. He said nothing of substance and completely dodged the question at hand. I imagine that the person who asked the question is sitting there like, my God, who is this guy? Who is this guy? I know for a fact that if it were President Obama, VP Harris, Governor Walz, President Biden, they would have been able to have like an in-depth analysis of what this person asked. But it's Donald, as I said, Donald Trump's not any of those people. He does not have the skill that those people have. Instead, he has the very unique skill of rambling and saying nothing for like a minute to 2 minutes straight, as he just did right there. And in addition to this, I just want to show you a perfect analysis from someone who was there. So I'm sure you saw this clip where a woman by the name of Reshma Sujani asked Donald Trump a question about childcare and what his policy is on childcare and what bill he would advance. And he did the same thing. He rambled for 2 minutes straight and said nothing. And I think her analysis of this back and forth and of Donald Trump's appearance at this economic club is just so perfect. Let's just watch it together.
With us now.
If you haven't seen the stories yet, this beautiful woman behind me is Adriana Smith. She's a 30-year-old registered nurse from Georgia who is currently on life support in a hospital in the state. Adriana was sadly declared brain dead when she was 9 weeks pregnant in February. It is now May and she is still on life support, and her family cannot make a choice about whether to take her off of life support now or not due to the fact that she is still gestating her baby. Due to Georgia's heartbeat law, which makes all abortions, essentially all abortions, illegal past the point of 6 weeks, when the first signs of fetal heart activity can be detected, she cannot be taken off of life support because that would end the life of the fetus. I want you to remember she was 9 weeks pregnant. 9 weeks pregnant when she was declared brain dead. If you know nothing about pregnancy, that is nowhere close to viability. I mean, not even close. At this point, she's not being viewed as a human being. She is being viewed as an incubator in the eyes of the law. And it's not as though this is a flawless process, essentially growing a baby in a body that's being kept alive by machines. The doctors have already said that they've detected fluid on the brain of the fetus. This means the baby may not even survive at all. And if he does, there's a good chance he will have severe deficits. He could be blind. He could be severely cognitively impaired. He might not be able to walk. And remember, at the time she was declared brain dead, this was a 9-week embryo. A 9-week embryo cannot survive without the mother, obviously. And the only reason she is still alive is because of medical intervention. Meaning, if there had been the option to allow her to peacefully pass, this would not be a question. Now, I saw an interview with her mother, and her mother was very clear. Look, we don't know for sure that we would or wouldn't remove life support at this point, but we should be able to have the option. They just want to be able to make the choice, but they can't. They can't. It's the government. The state government has a law which makes it so that they do not have an option here. When we talk about restrictive abortion laws being problematic because they remove all agency from women, this is the sort of stuff that we mean. That hospital would not be able to remove her organs after life support was removed and donate them to another human being without her previous consent or the consent of her immediate family. I don't really understand how this is different. And again, I stress, she was not 25 weeks pregnant, 32 weeks pregnant, or something of that nature when she was declared brain dead. 9 weeks. She was 9 weeks along. So since February, it is now mid-May, since February, her family has been forced to go to the hospital, visit her, see her lying in that bed with machines breathing for her, knowing that she won't come back, but also not being able to fully grieve her death either. In that interview, her mother says, she's 50 years old. Her father's in her 50s as well. They are already going to be tasked with helping to raise her 5-year-old that she's leaving behind. And now they may also be tasked with raising this baby. And they say, that's our grandson and we love him, but there's a good chance that that baby won't even survive after all of this. And if he does, he could have severe delays. Furthermore, this is racking up a massive medical bill. And you know who's going to be responsible for paying that? Her family. And they didn't have a choice of this. They had no choice here. And then if this baby is born with severe special needs and the need for additional medical care after the point where he's born, they will also be responsible for that as well. This just goes to show the government should not be able to make your medical decisions. It should never happen. And this is the result of our government essentially being able to have their legislative hands in the uterus of every woman of this country.
Yeah, that's a good question. So click through for context and watch that video I recorded last night. I do not believe that politically the issue of Joe Biden's decline over the last 2 years of his presidency and efforts by his family and inner circle to cover that up, I don't think those issues are going away anytime soon. I think those issues are going to play a big role in the 2028 election, depending on who runs. One thing that was confusing to me after Joe Biden and Kamala Harris were elected in 2020 is that Joe Biden seemed to just sideline Kamala Harris right out of the gate. And, I think that really further hampered her ability to run effectively in 2024 once Joe Biden did drop out. I mean, obviously she was completely hamstrung right out of the gate by the fact that she had less than 4 months to campaign. I just firmly believe she was put in a really, really impossible decision, or in an impossible situation further hampered by the fact that, Joe Biden, the president of the United States, was essentially demanding of her and her campaign that there be no daylight, no gap whatsoever when she was campaigning between her and Joe Biden's policies. I just, throughout 2024, Joe Biden was polling in the high 30s. It was the lowest approval ratings for an incumbent president running for re-election, I think, in modern history, apart from maybe George H.W. Bush. But, he dropped out of the campaign. Kamala was selected to run. And then Joe Biden, his administration, basically immediately slapped handcuffs on her and prevented her from separating herself from Joe Biden at all, knowing that he was polling worse than any incumbent president in modern history. And in modern history, no incumbent president has ever dropped out of a race that close in time to election day. They put multiple anchors on her. But again, it's one of the things that I talked about in that video as far as polling and things like that. And, you say what you want about polling, but as I have always said, it's polling trends over time, I think, are where you can get the most accurate information from polling, as opposed to one poll here or one poll there. And the polling results over time show that over 70% of Americans for over 2 years, and I'm talking about the electorate as a whole, over 70% of Americans believe that Joe Biden was not up to the job. He was not physically or cognitively able to serve as president of the United States. And he had absolutely no way to overcome that. And I remember being concerned about that during 2023. And then I remember watching the State of the Union address during the beginning of 2024. And he did great that night. He did great that night. And I was just like, oh, thank God, man. But I know I talk about the bulwark on here quite a bit, for good reason. But I think one of the most valuable podcasts that the Bulwark puts out on a weekly basis is one that's called The Focus Group by Sarah Longwell. She talks to voters. She does focus groups with voters multiple times a week. And there's a different theme each week. But you get to hear actual voters expressing their thoughts and opinions. And that show is enraging. It's absolutely enraging hearing some of the things that these people say. And, but they are voters and they comprise demographics within the electorate. And it's, our news media right now is like TikTok. It's you can go out and pick and choose which quote unquote news organizations you follow. And more often than not, you can pick news organizations that will offer you reporting that supports things that you already believe. And, we've, over the last 20 years, it's we've sorted ourselves in this country geographically. People move to where they feel most comfortable politically. We saw a huge amount of this during COVID when everybody was moving to Florida because, Florida was basically just letting COVID run free, and everybody treated that as freedom. And so a lot of Trump supporters moved to Florida. We do the same thing with our news media now, our news intake, our news diet. And one of the things that I think has been most valuable for me because I read a lot of news. I try to keep a pretty even menu, I guess, of news that I read and listen to and watch. But the Focus Group podcast is really the only place that I've found where it's like you can hear voters with whom you disagree, giving thoughtful and complete answers on issues that are important to them. And I do think it's very important, especially for us on the left, to hear these voices of people on the right, from the source, hearing their voices, their actual voices, and what these voters are concerned with and what's on their minds and what they're thinking about and what's important to them. Not to give it any credence or anything, but just to be aware of the perceptions and the perspectives that are out there. And as I said, it's like, I don't know that I've ever listened to an episode of the Focus Group and not walked away angry. Because sometimes you just want to reach through your speakers and grab these people and throttle them from some of the shit that's coming out of their mouths. But again, it's incredible, I mean, I'm seeing people on the left all over TikTok saying nobody cares about this stuff with Joe Biden and his decline. Nobody cares about it. Nobody cares about it. Nobody cares about it. Voters on the Focus Group had been talking about these issues weekly for the last 2 years, over 2 years. It was something that was very important to a significant part of the electorate. And obviously it played a huge role in Joe Biden deciding to step away from a presidential campaign less than 4 months before Election Day, where he was an incumbent president. That's never happened in our lifetimes. That has never happened in our lifetimes. The first 2 years of his presidency were incredibly consequential. And my fear is that his decision to stay in the race after the 2022 midterms is just going to wipe out that legacy and the legacy of his previous 40 or 45 years of public service. Because his stated goal in running for re-election was to deny Trump a second term. And that's exactly what we got. And if he would have stayed in, we'd have, Republicans would have super majorities in the House and the Senate as well. But we gotta take in information that's outside of our bubbles, man. We just have to take in information that is outside of our bubbles, no matter how much we dislike it.
There is not nearly enough outrage over this bribe Trump is taking from Qatar in the form of a $400 million jet made by Boeing called the Palace in the Skies. Trump went on social media and confirmed that they are taking this as a gift. It's not a gift. This is a bribe, and it needs to be treated as such. The Constitution states in the Emoluments Clause that any elected official cannot take gifts from a foreign country. And he's on True Social saying he's taking a gift. This is one, impeachable, and his State Department is saying that it's okay, which therefore they should all be impeached as well. If they cannot uphold their oath to the Constitution, they can no longer hold office. Does anyone remember Bob Menendez? He was a U.S. Senator found guilty of taking bribes in the form of cash and other payments from Egypt, a foreign country. He was sentenced to 11 years in prison, found guilty. Why is this not happening to Trump? This needs to be happening. He needs to be arrested, really, because this is just beyond the pale. Like, how can we hold senators to this standard when you're not going to hold the president to the same standard? It's ridiculous. This is all part of Project 2025. People cannot become complacent right now. This is not the time. You need to rise up and speak out about this. You're not being loud enough. There's not enough outrage, and there needs to be a lot more. We can stop this. If people get outraged, they could be forced to pull back on this. The whole plan was to bombard us with so much stuff that the court systems wouldn't be able to keep up, and that we would just become overwhelmed with it all and check out. And you can't let that happen. You got to stay engaged. I know it's a lot, and they are doing this every day. It's one thing after another, but you got to stay engaged and stay in this and keep the movement going against Trump and his regime as they take down and tear apart our country. There's also a new Air Force One under development and being constructed. He's just impatient. It's ridiculous. He can wait for the new one. Let me know what you guys think about this. Comment, show your displeasure towards this. Like, share, spread the word, and I'll see you back here for the 411.
Yesterday, the Supreme Court heard a case that could not only decide who gets to be an American citizen, but whether any district judge in the country can stop Trump from enacting his illegal and unconstitutional agenda from anywhere in the country. This, of course, is part 4 of my series discussing birthright citizenship. If you want to hear more about the background of the case and what the government and the plaintiff's arguments were before the Supreme Court yesterday, go ahead, follow this comment, and watch my previous videos on that, breaking that down. So I think before the oral argument, many people predicted it to be a sort of party line split where the conservatives were going to be in favor of the government's argument. And of course, the liberal justices, the 3 on the court, were going to be in favor of the plaintiff's arguments. But the oral argument kind of played out in a very strange way yesterday, with nearly all of the justices expressing some sort of disagreement with the government's argument in this case. Now, unpredictably, Justice Alito came out very strongly against universal injunctions, saying that if all 680 district judges were allowed to issue universal injunctions, that would be chaos on the ground. Now, a big surprise was Justice Amy Coney Barrett, who kind of did ride the government attorney a little bit. She asked if the government had a policy of following circuit precedent, and the Solicitor General, John Sauer, he hedged on the question. He didn't really answer it. He said, generally, we follow circuit precedent. So if the circuit issues a decision, we have a general policy to follow that. And she said, you're still saying the word general. Why are you saying the word generally? He would not follow circuit precedent, particularly in a case like this. So that's troubling. Justice Kavanaugh seemed focused on the practicalities of this executive order. He asked, what's going to happen to all of the babies born without citizenship documents? And the Solicitor General didn't really have a good answer for that. He again kept hedging, but Justice Kavanaugh did not let him off the hook and kept pushing him. What's going to happen? And he frankly said, I don't know. We haven't figured that out yet. Justice Kavanaugh said, Trump's order gave the government 30 days to figure this out. Are you guys going to have it done by then? I expressed deep skepticism about all of these babies that are trying to push on everyone now. I think my favorite argument came from Justice Kagan. Justice Kagan asked General Sauer, how is this case ever going to get to the Supreme Court on the merits if the courts can only issue injunctions as to the plaintiffs and not universal? So let's say that every person affected by this across the country brings thousands of lawsuits to stop this executive order. Of course, the executive order is always going to lose in the lower court because it's so blatantly unconstitutional. Now, if the plaintiffs keep winning in the lower courts, Trump is never going to appeal it to the higher courts because they don't want a ruling on the merits. So what that means in practicality, unless you can afford an attorney to bring your case, you would not get relief. You would be rejected as an American citizen. You would not get your birthright citizenship. I asked ChatGPT to take this principle and sort of apply it to some worst case scenarios. And I think what it came up with was pretty interesting. So let's say that Trump passes an executive order that all public protests must be approved by a newly formed federal free speech review board, which may deny permits based on content that it considers is a threat to national unity. Trump signs an executive order putting into place this new public free speech review board. If you want to do a public protest, you have to get prior permission from this board, who can deny you if you're against national unity. This would be a blatantly unconstitutional executive order. It would violate your First Amendment rights to free speech and freedom of association. But let's say that ACLU sues to stop this because they know that it's illegal. Now, the courts then can only issue an injunction against the ACLU, meaning that they can't stop ACLU protests. But if you can't afford an attorney to fight this, you would be blocked from your First Amendment rights to protest. How does that seem fair? If Trump never appeals these district court's rulings, the Supreme Court will never get an opportunity to rule on the merits saying this executive order is unconstitutional. So basically what he can do now is via executive order, he can do whatever the hell he wants. You have to bring a lawsuit to stop him, even if it's a fundamental constitutional right he's violating. If you can't afford an attorney, too bad. Your rights will be taken away and violated. You will sit in prison or rot or whatever punishment he comes up with. And the Supreme Court can never tell Trump that his executive orders are illegal because he'll never appeal to the Supreme Court. Or let's say Trump deems the Democratic Party to be a national terrorist organization, decides to arrest everyone who's a registered Democrat. Unless you can afford an attorney to go to court and say, hey, this executive order violates my rights, and then the court would grant a preliminary injunction as to you, you should be released from prison. But if your neighbor who can't afford an attorney doesn't bring that, he has to stay in prison. And the Supreme Court will never rule on this because Trump will never appeal his losses. It's just an actual literal suspension of constitutional rights with no recourse. It basically puts your rights at sale for whether you can afford an attorney or not. So people who can afford an attorney, they can challenge these things to get their constitutional rights restored. But if you cannot afford an attorney, your rights are gone. And I think that the justices kind of saw some of that, the arguments that were being presented yesterday. So I entered this oral argument with low expectations of the court doing the right thing. But I exited the oral argument, and after reading some of the takes online by the New York Times, the NPR, and others, I kind of feel better. It's still very unpredictable what they're going to do. They're still clearly split along party lines. Alito and Thomas are going to rule in favor of the government. Where the others fall, though, on this issue, when it's such a blatantly unconstitutional order, it will be interesting to see what happens. I have a little bit more hope, but not a lot. Drop below if you have any questions about this.
All right, guys, thank you for watching. If you made it this far into the video, don't forget to like and subscribe. Highly appreciate it. Let's grow together. Let me know in the comments below what you think about this whole situation. And see you guys in the next one. Bye-bye, and thank you.